Hello and welcome everyone to the first postgrad TASA Thursday of 2023. Since this is the first one, it gives me immense pleasure to see so many old and new faces here. I'm Richa George. I'm the TASA postgraduate portfolio leader, and I'll be facilitating this session today. Before we go any further, let me acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land from where I speak, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and the Boonwurrung peoples of the East Kulin Nations. I also pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, especially if you're joining us today. We acknowledge their living connection to country, relationship with the land, and all living things extending back tens of thousands of years. The session we have planned for today is an exciting one. Today we have a panel discussion with a very impressive and accomplished panel, followed by an open Q&A session. So you can put in your questions in the chat and we can discuss them through the session if the panel feels like it, or we can just keep it for the Q&A. Again, thank you for joining us today, and let's go into the topic of discussion, which is navigating the sticky question of ethics as practice in digital research. Internet scholars have been innovating and adapting different approaches to digital fieldwork in response to the ongoing creation and evolution of internet platforms, technologies, and practices. And at Markham says that to study the internet is to better understand society. So digital methods are gaining popularity in interdisciplinary academic research, but what often gets overlooked or sidelined as the more institutional aspect of research methodology is a consideration of ethics, especially a consideration of ethics as practice. On the one hand, amidst debates about digital data, including what we now call big data and small data and thick data, internet scholars have a hard time agreeing not only on what data is considered private and what is public, but also have varied positions on how publicly accessible data should and can be treated. On the other hand, researchers often find themselves in a lot of gray areas when it comes to considerations of their own power and positionality with regard to the ethically responsible relationships with their respondents, the gamers or the users, the internet influencers, etc., whose internet practices we are interested in exploring. To top it all off, professional organizations such as the Association of Internet Researchers, or AIR, urge researchers to ask themselves these difficult questions and also claim that traditional ethical guidelines per se are of limited usefulness. So to help us unpack all this sticky stuff, we have three wonderful panelists. We've got Dr. Emily van der Nagel, who is a lecturer in communications and media studies in Monash University. Her research explores myriad aspects of the internet, including social media identities, platforms, and cultures, amongst other aspects, with a particular focus on anonymity and pseudonymity. Next, we have Dr. Robbie Fordyce, a senior lecturer with the Department of Communications and Media Studies in Monash University. The breadth of his research interests is really vast, including but not limited to platform studies, game cultures, narratives and freedom and fandom, and more importantly for us, questions of data value and digital ethics. Our third panelist is Dr. Ben Lyal, a lecturer in digital media with the School of Media, Film and Journalism at Monash University. His research explores how social lives are impacted by digital infrastructures, smart devices, and the policies associated with these. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you for being here. And without further ado, let's jump right in. If I may, would the three of you start off with a description of how the digital factors into your own research context, followed by your thoughts on how considerations of ethics are complicated in these digital research environments? How about we start with you, Emily?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Emily van der Nagel. My research as a social media researcher in particular clearly starts and ends on the internet. So this is something that I've been thinking about my entire research trajectory, really. Like you've said, Richa, there's a lot of grey area in all of these concerns. I am going to quickly drop into the chat one of the documents that you have raised, which is the Association of Internet Researchers Ethical Guidelines. It's something that that the association talks about a lot, given that research on the internet has has a lot to do with what is public and what is private. And these kinds of boundaries, shifting concerns, shifting contexts and identities has always been something that internet studies has paid a lot of attention to. And so you would think that in doing that inside and across our own sort of research and projects and approaches, that AIR would be able to give you a solid answer to questions like, when I'm doing a research project, can I go to somewhere on the internet and use comments about this topic that already exist? Are they public or private? Can I use them in research? And there's just no straightforward answer to that. And there still isn't. And people talk about this all the time. If I'm doing a research project, can I go to Reddit and use a subreddit, discussion that's all about this particular topic that I'm focused on? Are those comments public or private? There's no way around trying to paint any sort of place on the internet as completely up for grabs versus completely not okay to include in research unless you seek people's explicit permission. And so in kind of grappling with that, I feel like there's a lot of really interesting questions to be asked. And, that's the idea of the panel, really, is to start tracing out some of those gray areas, and really trying to, I think, at least if you don't know all the answers from the beginning, building in a concern for ethics from the very beginning, when it's core to our understanding of social media, of the internet, of online places and spaces and communities and networks, that if we are trying to understand these spaces, I think we should, as researchers, develop a position on what kind of use is appropriate, what sort of considerations might be present for the people in these spaces, and how to basically, as an ethical concern, treat people with respect, because that is a principle that has to underlie all of the research that we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Robbie?
Thanks, Richa. Joining you all here today from Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung land. So in terms of this question that Richa's posed about, sort of like, how do I encounter the digital? I guess for me, my work around the digital is often a lot less of strictly sociological, which is something that some of you may have just joined the discussion around when I was first talking earlier. My interest is often much more about the sort of the way that digital technology is kind of created and the impacts that these have on users, the way that digital technology maybe shapes what is possible for us in cultural and social terms, but also in terms of the political and our political ambitions and how we might use digital media as a part of some sort of program of resistance or political organization separate from sort of traditional state structures or across national lines. I guess in terms of those sort of discussions, like ethics does become it is a big concern, I suppose, in the way that we can think about the consequences for the people that we study when we're talking about forms of political resistance that may be criminalized with punishments that, those of us in Australia, for the most part, don't actually have to consider as part of our daily life. So ethics is something where we need to consider that the implications that might emerge around sort of social discussion of information or communications media does come with a cost to life and limb, as they say. I guess when I sort of try and deal with ethics myself, often, ethics is kind of like this really large question, as Emily was charting out. I personally like the way that, not to out myself as the white guy to cite Deleuze and Guattari in the first 5 minutes of his talk, but Deleuze and Guattari do have this great way of thinking about morality and ethics that I think is really useful, which is where they sort of talk about morality as this kind of pre-given set of sort of rules and instructions that we might associate with something like like a religion or a particular political ideology that usually sort of has come to decisions before like any kind of question gets brought up, whereas ethics they see as the sort of practice of doing that you have when you encounter some like problem, when you encounter a challenge. That's where your ethics comes into play, is to negotiate situations that are always like pretty individual, pretty specific, and not something where you can kind of come in with a set of rules about exactly how you're going to deal with that before you actually understand what's going on. So when I think about ethics, it's usually something that's more about trying to understand the situation first, like on some sort of initial level before starting to think about it in terms of like how am I actually going to approach this ethically? Like you kind of need to have some sort of understanding of what's going on before you start to do that. And you have to be open, I guess, to the fact that your like the ethical needs of the situation may change in response to like what you encounter as you go. I also feel like often when we talk about digital ethics, it's like this may be something that's particular to academics, I'm not sure, but often we think about it as something that's like kind of like a question of research method, as opposed to just like something that we might need to embed in our own lives as individuals. Like, what is our digital ethics with regards to content that we share online, with regards to like stuff that family have done, stuff that our friends have done, like disclosing personal information about third parties. I also feel like there's a lot of like digital ethics also has this kind of like branded identity to it, which is like kind of like the humanities selling a class of work to industry, which is, you know, we've seen banks and governments and other sorts of organizations develop so like digital ethics offices and roles, which are often, you know, taken from this kind of like, I would say it as like a Luciano Floridi influenced kind of approach, which is like, we're going to like do ethics rather than be regulated, which is basically creating like codes of practice internally to prevent actually being subjected to some sort of actual regulation or legal obligation. So I do see like a lot of sort of concerns there around digital ethics that we could talk about today that go beyond just questions for our own research methods. But I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Ben.
Hi, everybody. Tough acts to follow here for me. A lot of great points I think have already been raised by Emily and Robbie here. I guess in my research, I'm particularly interested in relationships and different dynamics between them. And I think we, being in this sort of broadly sociological and beyond space, we're all interested in interactions and relationships. And I think the main thing to grapple with for me is, the constantly changing nature of those relationships and the plurality and the shifting sands that kind of exists in, you know, this is very broad strokes across the types of things we might want to research and explore. So I think it's really important what's kind of been outlined here in kind of the points that have been made around what we like. I think the thing that interested me about this session was the as practice aspect, and I think that's a lot of what Emily and Robbie have kind of pointed to already. There's a lot of embedding that we can do in our own work, I think, to try and be ethical in ways that are never quite going to be captured in the types of formats we might engage with ethics as a kind of process, you know, doing ethics applications or getting ethics approval, or engaging with, you know, writing up our research methods and methodologies and things. There are aspects of that are a little bit more lived that, do come down to our own kind of practices. And I think that's where the advantages and disadvantages lie, I think, because there's plenty of opportunities to, as Robbie kind of said, be open to change over the course of a project or even a specific encounter that you're having with a space or with a person. So there's lots of options for change to occur and for things to stay, things to stay ethical, you know, and maintain their ethics as you kind of go through them. So I think that's one of the advantages, but obviously that comes with, you know, disadvantages as well for when you do need to kind of formalize things or when you need to kind of explain it in a pithy kind of manner. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm happy to leave it there as an opening kind of point. I took lots of notes while people were talking, so there's definitely things to kind of bounce off, I think.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. And thank you for giving us a glimpse into the incredible work that you do, but also trying to bring out the fact that there's such a diversity in the tension surrounding the diversity in the different kinds of tension surrounding ethics when surrounding issues of ethics when we're doing work on the internet or about the internet or using the help of the internet. And like Robbie said, which was really interesting, which was that the issue of ethics goes beyond just our work context, but also in terms of ethics as practice, as for so many things. As an example, was the consideration that I have as a mom to a child, where I haven't really thought about when I take a picture of my child or a video of my child and put it on the internet. But I'm guessing and how I have different feelings about whether that's really ethical of me to share his data without his permission and informed consent. So thank you for giving me those great introductions. So I can just jump into the next prompt, which is, how do you sort of navigate the continuum when it comes to a continuum between public and private online data, considering that despite the very public nature of the internet, several users perceive of their online interactions as being private. So how do you navigate this issue when it comes to your own work? So this time, if we could start with you, Ben.
I think maybe just as a starting point, a good way to navigate this, and I think Emily spoke to this already, like this is such a necessary tension to explore. And you'll notice if you click through on the AIR document that Emily linked to, that's at version 3, and they're quite good at. A really interesting part of those documents is where the contributors note the changes from previous versions and why. And I think it's a really fascinating example of people continuing to be reflective and reflexive about how they go about this as, things change to us and around us. The public-private question, I think, a really helpful thing across an idea for me is to try and, I guess, create a trajectory from conservative to generous. And I don't mean like politically conservative. I just mean, I think it helps to start from a position that really, really takes the privacy question really seriously and tries to kind of learn about a space and navigate a space, whether it's entirely online or offline. But if it involves the digital, I think you're immediately kind of translating interactions into lots of different formats. And so there's always a lot to learn about the specific area you're looking at or the question you have. And so I think, starting at a place that is fairly conservative there and not assuming that you know too much of anything about what's happening. And then, moving through in a process that is always, and again, this goes back to what Emily said, that is generous to the interactions and the people that are in these different spaces and these different contexts. And I think that's super important. And I think it also kind of links back to Robbie's point there about your own practices in any kind of given online or digital context. I think having an awareness of those for yourself makes it easier to kind of have a conversation or an observation with other people, because you're coming at it from a genuinely like dialogical point of view. You can sit there and kind of appraise the fact that practices X and Y aren't for you and you don't engage with them, but there's ways in which you can, explore and observe those for other people. And I think that's a lot more of an appropriate way than, kind of trying to kind of infiltrate a space or put on a kind of performance that might allow you to fit into a space. So I think that can really, that could really be helpful as well, having those kind of outlined for yourself.
Thank you, Ben. Emily.
All right, I want to tell you a story, and I'm going to pop in here a link. I love to pop a good link in the chat because
Fantastic.
I'm the kind of guy that has a lot of notes. Okay, so I've got this link in the chat here, and it's a link to a paper, an open access paper by Joseph Riegel. He is an American scholar. He works in Northwestern University in Boston. And the title of the paper is Disguising Reddit Sources and the Efficacy. Is that how you say that? I know how to spell it, sorry. And the efficacy of ethical research. Okay. So this is a paper where Joseph Riegel has decided to explore ethics by basically taking as a starting point the way that some researchers of social media, they encounter things that people have said, on public places of the internet, or reasonably, by public, I mean, you don't need to log in, you don't need to have a personal connection with these people to see these posts, right? If you're unfamiliar with Reddit, the way the bulletin board works is that it's divided into, thousands of different subreddits or topics. People pose questions, they put up dilemmas, they link to things, and a lot of discussion follows, right? So Reddit, because you don't need to log in often, and because you don't need those personal connections to see what people post, it's a really fertile space for research. You can basically go to Reddit, you can, you can nominate any kind of topic that you want to find out more about, and there's a good chance that people have already had this discussion about it that you can find, that you can source, and that you can then use as material to analyze for a research project. So because people do that, there are lingering questions around, like, but hang on, do people from Reddit know that that their content is being used in this way, and is it ethical to do so? What a lot of researchers do, including myself, is occasionally use those posts without necessarily contacting every single individual who has contributed to that conversation, and we will use those insights and that existing information to inform a research project. A common technique is not including the Reddit usernames of the comments. Another common technique is what Joseph calls fuzzing in this context, which is using comments that people have made, but changing parts of them or rewording or paraphrasing them in order to get around the idea that people might try to find that person who posted that comment by, Googling what the comment is and trying to get a link back to their username. Okay, so Joseph Riegel has noticed that people do that people research Reddit, that they take Reddit comments for research, and that they, in an attempt to be ethical, they try to fuzz them or try to paraphrase these comments. This is something that I've done before in my own research, and I've written and published a paper that uses Reddit comments in this very specific way to make an argument about what particular kinds of parts of Reddit might mean in different sorts of contexts. Before Joseph published this paper, he got in touch with me, and he sent me this email, and he said, basically, hey, Emily, I have read a paper that you wrote. You used Reddit comments. You said that from an ethical perspective, you fuzzed them. So I tried to find the places on Reddit that you had fuzzed. Like, I tried to unfuzz your comments and I was successful. What do you reckon? And I was like, damn. Firstly, it is very interesting that when you publish things, sometimes they reach unexpected audiences. I would not be the first Reddit researcher who has had their research about Reddit posted on Reddit and discussed by a particular part of the community, criticized by the very community that they were trying to research, for example. Like, this has been known to happen. But as far as, I guess, unintended audiences, I didn't necessarily necessarily expect when I published my paper about a very I guess intimate part of Reddit, that another researcher would go back and try to locate the sources, the subreddits and the posters of the comments that I'd used, right? And so, so I'm part of this paper, the paper that Joseph Riegel published. When he says, you can read it from the link, when he says in that abstract that he, tested if the sources could be located, that he interviewed 10 of the report's authors. So I'm one of those authors. And we had a really good conversation about what fuzzing is meant for, what is ethical about it, and kind of, what role we have as researchers in this process to protect people. Like there are really important conversations to be had, for example, about, okay, what kind of scrutiny might you be under as a researcher? Because you can never really, you can never predict, I think, the ways that once your work is out there, the sort of people who might receive it and who might you scrutinize the work and scrutinize you as a researcher. So unintended consequences and audiences and context, I think, is just one aspect of that. But then again, when people post on Reddit, a lot of the time, I would say most of the time, they're not anticipating that their comments would end up as part of an academic research paper. Mm-hmm. So there's a sort of cycle in this particular instance of unanticipated audiences and contexts here. And I guess another aspect of this is that, if you're researching how people work and how societies work, which is, as I understand it, a really fundamental concern of sociology, you are dealing with people, and people are unpredictable, people are messy, and people are going to do things that that don't fit neatly into stuff like ethical guidelines or spreadsheets or flowcharts or whatever. So I think, trying to trying to like predict where your work might end up all of the time is a sort of futile exercise. What I think is important here is that if you are a researcher and if you're publishing things and if you want to do this work in public, if you want your work to reach audiences, you should know that you're working with people and that people are messy. You should also know that you might come under scrutiny, and you should be prepared for that. You should make decisions in your work that are defensible, because by the time Joseph Riegel came to me and said, I found your subreddit that you pulled these comments from, even though you tried to disguise them, I found the Reddit users, I was able to say, firstly, I welcome your scrutiny. I'm a researcher. My decisions should be defensible, and I will defend them to you because, they're part of my practice. And secondly, I think it was a really interesting discussion that we had about, like, what are the stakes here? Okay. I was like, so, okay, you found my posts, you found the users. You had to go so many layers deep into my paper before you did that. You are talking about a paper that I think has been cited maybe twice. Like, it's not a highly read paper. It deals with a very, very sensitive part of Reddit that not a lot of people get into. It's also very not safe for work, which is, like I think in the sort of digital intimacy space, it's not necessarily something that reflects a much broader part of Reddit. So you found the comments. What happened to the people who posted them, right? Like, do you know their real names now? Can you find them? Are they humiliated because a researcher discovered their comments? Like there's a lot to this, I think, that is definitely worth wrestling with. And when this researcher came to me and said, I like your methods I have put under scrutiny, I think that, it's important to to be the sort of researcher who can come under scrutiny. And that I think when you're trying to make good decisions about how to do research, that you make your decisions knowing that you can defend them, and that, you know, yes, people are messy. Yes, internet contexts are very messy, but you should be able to say, look, I made these decisions with the you know, with respect for the person behind them, with my best understanding of the context and the platform and the kind of, you know, things involved there, and you know, with a kind of sense that even if you were put under scrutiny, you could stand it.
Yeah. Thanks, Emily. That was a banger of a story, and so important as a researcher, considering issues that you know, how sensitive is the topic that when you're considering ethics as practice and making decisions about your research. How sensitive is the topic? How vulnerable, I guess, are the people that we're talking about? Essentially, like you said, what are the stakes involved? And so, Robbie, especially that you mentioned that you work around the scene of resistances where the stakes can be really high. What are your thoughts about the public and the public-private continuum and privacy?
Yeah, thanks, Richa. I think, so just to first point to the work of Dana Boyd, who's done a bunch on the sort of public-private dimension. And I think like one of the things we do have to grapple with as researchers studying stuff that is digital or on the internet is like, you know, one of the things that Boyd identifies is basically that young people don't expect they have privacy anymore. And you know, this means that many of the services that we are getting our data from when we do sort of social research on social networking sites, for instance, you know, a lot of it's kind of already in this sort of assumed kind of quasi-public space, but that doesn't mean that these people didn't want privacy, even if their stuff is like public in some way, whether or not it's been pseudonymized, or, you know, whether or not you are able to sort of de-anonymize that person later on by looking through comment threads and so on. So I think I find the public-private nature of the internet not like for me, it's not like a useful continuum to be exploring like what kind of information we should be sharing about people. One of the other things I'd sort of think about is we often sit with this assumption that there's like a one-to-one relationship between like accounts or utterances and like some sort of like natural living person kind of behind that, as if both that person is like a continuous, you know, modern liberal subject who consciously understands themselves as a holistic person, and not as this sort of like disaggregated set of desires and conflicting kind of identities all in one person, or even maybe they share their device or their account or whatnot. I mean, certainly I share my Netflix account with my parents. So, you know, there's just some day-to-day complexity there. But I think what I wanted to think about more deeply around this sort of stuff was less about like, because I think Emily and Ben are actually really on top of this kind of you know, accounts based on utterances or statements on the internet. My interest is kind of more around like what are our ethics in terms of like how we're getting that data from like the corporate platforms that often contain or own it. I think at least in terms of your question about the politics of this sort of stuff and the costs paid by people for having their data sort of on a corporate platform is, you know, something that we can look at quite easily with the Musk takeover of Twitter. This is like somewhat apocryphal, but I understand that you know, the Saudi government had been spending years trying to get into Twitter to get access to data about dissidents who were communicating locally via Twitter, and Twitter had up until relatively recently kind of refused and actually fired people from the organization who are understood to be engaged in espionage. And then when Musk did his takeover, one of the things that happened, as I understand it, is that Saudi government folk were involved in the loan of money to Musk for the purchase. And so through that, they now have sort of like direct access to, you know, several decades of resistance, including, it should be noted, the stuff that will have happened during the MENA protests in 2010, 2011. You know, this may have led to a bunch of people dying. It's worth recognizing that. I also think that maybe on a more sort of research methods kind of level, it's worth thinking about like the actual mechanisms that we're using to get the data itself. So often when we're talking about getting data like at scale out of a platform, often people talk about accessing it via like an API or via scraping or one of those other methods. And I guess this is really just sort of, doing the academic equivalent of a retweet from years ago. But one of the things that I feel needs sort of a bit more scrutiny is like when we use things like API tools to get data out of a platform, we're often handing over the control or the terms of our research to a private corporation that doesn't necessarily have academic research interests in mind. They have, interest in not letting us get that data, as, maybe the Australian Facebook ad data program would be a good example of that. Whereas scraping is something where you give less power to the organization to dictate what information you get, and you're maybe a bit more aware of the limits on your methodological research, but you actually maybe have a degree of independence from these platforms in terms of their ability to shape what you can and cannot take out of their services. So I guess it's a pretty mechanical kind of point there about ethics, but it's like, we still need to recognize that these platforms generally do dictate what information we can get access to and shape our ethics and methods and so on beyond that.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, so in recognizing what all of you have actually spoken about, which is that people are messy inherently, and there's internet research is inherently unstable when it comes to ethics. A lot of internet scholars are right now advocating for a very case-based approach to internet research ethics. And amidst these debates, there's an increasing call for adopting what Caroline Dadas, for example, calls a researcher ethos, which basically encapsulates the relationship or the positionality that the researcher has towards data or the respondents who own the data. So this could be including or adopting a form of queer ethics, or this could be adopting a feminist ethics of care. Basically, it is to approach ethics not as an institutional checklist, but to approach ethics as practice and as part of your decision making, which is very, I guess it's conscientious. So, what are your thoughts or recommendations as a researcher for other researchers on building this form of researcher ethos, whether you agree with it, whether you have any tips in this one, whether you have any tips in terms of how you view your data, but not just data, but it's also how you assess things like benefits or risk to populations, or your own positionality when it comes to research. So yeah, what are your thoughts on it? If you could start with you, Emily.
I'll be quick because there's questions in the chat that I also want to get to, and I just told a long story. But I think positionality is really important when we talk about research. If we're trying to do research that approaches or at least considers in some way that really lofty goal of making the world a better place, or trying to address different kinds of communities and different kinds of like trying to include more voices, different perspectives, trying to work with and at times undo those sort of power relationships that sociologists are so obsessed with, then I think that we need to think of ethics as part of the way that we are part of the communities that we study, which I guess is a roundabout way of saying, like, whenever you're researching people, which is what sociologists do, it's also a lot of the time what the humanities does in a very broad sense. We need to think about, like, what's our relationship then to the groups and to the sorts of communities that we study? Are we part of those communities? Are we trying to to say something about a community that we are not part of, because those sorts of questions about our own identity and our own positionality, I think, are not separate from ethics. I think it is a good goal to research and to give voice to populations and groups and communities of people who have different kind of marginalities and different kind of intersectionalities, because those people are worth studying and they're worth being part of a broader discourse. But trying to interrogate our own relationship to those groups is really important. And I think when we're thinking about that, here I am studying a group of people on the internet who are involved in digitally intimate practices that I'm not involved in, right? How do I justify studying that group? What am I trying to say about them? And how will I approach this group of people ethically? How is it going to look? What's the impact going to be to those communities when I'm studying them? That's a little convoluted, but I think the researcher identity, the positionality, and the relationship to the groups of people that we study has to be part of our ethical approach.
Fantastic. Ben.
Yeah, totally second everything Emily kind of said there. I think that positionality is always super important. Even if too, you have to sit with the fact that like we as researchers are probably going to dwell on this a lot more than anyone else involved in the process. I think a lot of what I was saying earlier about generosity is probably that it's fair to say that people might kind of be people probably end up being more across what is happening in the phenomena that you're exploring themselves than you might anticipate going in, having read everything and coming from a standpoint where you want to make sure you're doing everything right and you're ticking the boxes you need to, but also embodying the ethics that you want to. The chances are people might want to choose to not be as involved or as invested in the types of practices as you are as the kind of researcher. So I think it's kind of our job to kind of overthink this, even at the risk of it, maybe not having somewhere to play out, but it's always, I think, super important to do. I think like a quick example of this I had was just doing some research that involved public services, so government, young people, and just happened to coincide with the pandemic. So, quite a kind of stressful space for the participants involved, and using a range of, Zoom-related, digitally mediated research approaches, as well as things like data scraping. And as part of that report we really strongly wanted to include like an outreachy, like responsive kind of element to kind of notify participants how the research was progressing. And I think in the end, it was, in terms of face-to-face participants, we had 155 people that this email went out to with, it's like, oh, wow, our report got released publicly and here's the things it's contributing to. And thank you so much for your input. 0 replies. But I think, vital that all of the background work was done by the research team to try and think about the kind of connections that were being made, what was being shared with people, the involvement of different stakeholders, all super important stuff, I think. And yeah, just in terms of, maybe I should try and find a link perhaps, but I think Kat Tiedenberg's done some excellent work. I know Emily's worked with Kat a lot. And I can't remember the name of the chapter, but I always think of it in my mind as the chapter that is like how not to be an asshole on the internet. And I think it's really good in this kind of ethics of care sort of space. So I'll try and dig up the link for that one.
I think I know which one you're talking about. I'll find it and put it in. I think it's the ethics in digital research. Yeah, I'll try and find a link. Yeah, but thank you, Ben. Yes, absolutely. Robbie.
Thanks, Richa. I guess for myself, the question of positionality is something where I try and think about the topics that I'm studying about as much as like my position within them. I don't think it's my place to sort of become like a scholar of Indigenous like politics online, or to study sex work or anything like that, because I'm not of those communities, and I don't think I'd be in a, even if I were able to feel like I had ticked off all the sort of responsibilities with regards to studying those groups, I think there's I'm still not a person to sort of like speak on behalf of them or speak about them. And I don't not just because I am not of the group, but also I just simply don't think I would do a good job of representing like the nuances of those sort of discussions and debates. That also sort of needs to come with its own kind of proviso, which is like not excluding those groups from the research just because you're not a scholar of them. So for instance, I did a longish project around 3D printing close to 10 years ago now. And, one of the things that I was pretty careful to make sure that we did do was like create scope and space for people. Like we had a lot of respondents who had disabilities that included sort of mobility issues, and just working hard to make sure that people who were from marginalized groups who wanted to have a say weren't sort of somehow restricted simply because I didn't feel like I was in a position to represent them as a community. I felt like I was much better placed to represent sort of individuals that I'd had discussions with who knew who I was and what they needed to say to me. I also sort of, I feel like this, I've got a point that I want to make that's kind of, I feel important, that tacks onto the sort of more general question, which is also just like, I think it's really easy to become cynical about institutional research ethics and sort of see them solely as kind of like, legalistic documents that don't actually add anything. And I understand where that sort of cynicism comes from. And, I say this having had that cynicism myself, but it's also like, they are often, at least in my experience, important documents to work through, at least as a checklist around your thinking around particular things, and also to kind of like make sure that you're not going like way too far off the track in terms of like what you're trying to do. Like actually having a document where you have to explain to someone like in fairly plain language what you're doing and why. I think like even if you're not doing research, institutional research ethics, maybe you should think about doing that yourself. And to go on to another point that's kind of adds to that, it's like we also we shouldn't see research ethics as kind of like done and resolved just because it's all been ticked off, and recognizing that when problems occur we need to like actually be upfront about them, and when we see our colleagues having research ethics issues, the solution, condemnation may be appropriate, but it's not the only thing that we can do to try and rectify situations. And I might just sort of point people in the direction of that redacted qualitative research paper from last year, where, I think the person doing that was deliberately deceptive, and the research committee was maybe deceived. And the consequence of it is that the paper has been redacted, even though it was like quite a bad paper at the time. Yeah, so that's a bit of a ramble, but
no. Thank you. Thank you also for, I guess, breaking down some of the walls of cynicism that kind of revolve around institutional ethics. Okay, I'm very aware that we're quite at time, but we do have a couple of questions in the chat that haven't been answered yet. So I'm just very quickly gonna read that one. There's one from Josh, which is. He takes careful precautions to anonymize and disguise quotes for research data, but for an article that he's writing at the moment, he refers to a quote from another study where they don't make much of an effort to use that. So should he adopt the quote from the other study, or is it redundant because the original article's less careful approach? Oh, I think I'm mudding it up. Josh, do you want to go in and ask the question yourself?
Yeah, sure. So basically, yeah, I deal with pretty sensitive data as well with my research, but I'm referring to I'm having to deal with a article that is also on the same forum that I'm looking at, and yeah, they haven't taken as stringent kind of privacy, anonymizing quotes as much as I have. Now, I want to refer to one of the quotes that they kind of talk about because it's relevant to an argument that I'm working with. But, if I'm quoting their quote, which they aren't like making it non-reverse searchable, I'm kind of, I guess, giving data that is identifiable to that particular user, but it's actually not from my study, and someone else could find it elsewhere. I don't know, it just feels like a bit of a gray area, and I'm not quite sure what to do. So yeah, I think Emily probably has a lot of thoughts on this, perhaps.
I do, actually. How did you know? You know what, when it comes to things like that, where you're really wrestling with those kind of things, there is a time to make that part of the actual research and the discussion. Like there's, you know, there are, I think, situations where you could include a discussion of that, like in the paper, right? Like, hey, this was actually a challenge in doing this. There are other situations where that approach is not as workable or not as relevant, or maybe it would detract from what you're trying to say. So I think if you're trying to include that stuff and not, like, you know, expand on the ethical context of doing so, you, I think, might be in a position to apply some of your own kind of, you know, fuzzing, or like do the ethical work that they didn't do. Right. And maybe that's a point to expand on later in the paper. Maybe it's a point to expand on later in, you know, in a thesis or in a publication. But this is one of those situations where I think you're grappling with something. You're doing the work that Ben Lyall wants you to do, of overthinking the ethics, because you need your research to stand up to scrutiny later.
Absolutely.
I think Emily's
Thanks, Emily.
point about standing up to scrutiny later is really important. And that's what I took out of that anecdote earlier as well. I think that's super important. It's like, would you be able to stand by this later on when it's in an ongoing or larger body of work, or a pathway you see yourself on in the area or not? And like, how does that reflect on, how it fitted at the time? And I think it's also a little bit pragmatic, like the approach Emily pointed out. There is, like, you just embody the ethics you would perhaps rather have seen had you been the one, you know, making the call on it, and then you've got space to kind of flesh it out in other areas where it is more of a focus of the work. Because I'm assuming here, as Emily kind of said, I'm assuming it's not quite the space where you get time to tease out the tensions between different people's work on the space. In terms of ethics, I mean.
Absolutely. Yes. Lots of great things to take away from here. Overthinking ethics, and are you defensible later? Can you stand up to scrutiny? Again, do we have a last question? We've got about a minute for the question and the answer, if that is the case. Any questions in the chat that haven't been answered yet, or I'm aware that this is one of those sessions that we can overthink and overtalk about ad nauseum. But yes, what Emily has said, which is, feel free to, she's volunteered, feel free to reach out to Emily if you've got any questions, or I'm guessing to Ben and Robbie as well. Okay, but if that is the case, since we are at time, unfortunately, thank you so much to the panel, and thank you so much to everyone who's joined us for this fantastic discussion. All good things must come to an end, so I have to say, have a great rest of the day. Have a wonderful, hopefully warm weekend, bright weekend coming up, and hopefully we can carry this discussion forward on another session. Thanks so much, guys.